In the physics, Aristotle is attempting to find the principles of nature. And the way he goes about doing that is by trying to answer or resolve what was at his time a famous puzzle, a puzzle about coming to be. Philosophers prior to Aristotle had considered this puzzle, these philosophers called the pre Socratics, um, and had offered different takes on it. Whatever, it doesn't matter. The way that Aristotle goes about trying to determine what the principles of nature are is by considering this puzzle and responding to it. And so we see this puzzle stated in book 1, chapter 8 of the physics. That's where we read about it. He also he introduces it earlier in chapters we didn't read, and it kind of structures his own account of what the principles are, the principles of nature are, and that account comes in book 1, chapter 7. So we're going a little bit out of order here. We'll go to book 1, chapter 7 in a later video. We're going to consider this puzzle about coming to be first. So, coming to be, what he has in mind here is generation, things coming into being, something not being and then becoming, right? And so we tend to think that this kind of thing happens all the time when we make something, right? You go and you paint a painting of your parents or whatever, right? That painting came into being. It came to be. It became. It was generated, right? And not just paintings, but everything, living things, everything comes into being, right? Seems obvious. Well, what some pre Socratic philosophers had argued or pointed out, or however you want to put it, is that things aren't so simple as that. And if you start thinking about it, it looks like generation, coming to be, becoming, however you want to talk about it. It looks like coming to be is, in fact, impossible. It looks like it couldn't possibly happen. And this is a very counterintuitive result. But this is what some philosophers prior to Aristotle had argued. And Aristotle structures his own investigation into the principles of nature by responding to this puzzle, responding to this challenge, this argument from these earlier philosophers. So, what is the puzzle? Well, it starts like this. Okay, a thing that is made, a thing that is generated, a thing that comes to be. It must come to be either from what is or from what is not. There's no third possibility. Either it comes to be from things or something or whatever that is, or it doesn't. It comes to be from nothing, from what is not. The argument then runs that both of those are impossible. And so then the conclusion is that coming to be is impossible. This is what some pre Socratic philosophers had argued, right? This is the puzzle. And what we're going to see in a subsequent video is Aristotle's solution to it. But okay, so how exactly does this work? Why are these impossible or allegedly impossible? Because Aristotle doesn't think that they are at the end of the day. Aristotle thinks things do genuinely come to be, that generation is intelligible and possible. And so, but before we get to why he thinks that, what's going on here? Why are these things impossible? Well, let's start with number one. A thing must come to be from what is. Let's say we wanted to go that route. Some of these pre-Socratic philosophers wanted to argue that that's impossible. Well, why? Let's take right. So the puzzle is both those look impossible. Let's take a guitar. as our example, right? That's just in, pre-philosophical thinking. You would think that that's something that comes to be, that's generated, at the guitar factory or whatever. Well, let's see if that's possible. Let's see if that guitar really could have come to be. And let's go with number one there. Let's say that it comes from what is. Well, that's very abstract. What does that mean? Well, I don't know, like the parts of the guitar. That's probably what we'd think, that the guitar comes to be from the various parts of it, right? The strings, the neck, the blah, 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 all the other part, right? And so I listed a bunch there, and there are other ones besides, whatever, right? The various parts that make up a guitar, those things exist. They are, right? They're part of what is. And so you might want to say, look, the guitar comes to be from those things which exist, right? The strings, the neckboard, soundboard, or whatever, right? And so on. Right. And so the guitar comes to be from what is. So what's the problem there? Why is that impossible? Well, because if we go this route, these pre-Socratic philosophers would argue, well, then generation doesn't actually happen. All you've done is rearrange some things that already exist. You haven't actually generated anything. Nothing has really come to be. The guitar didn't pop into existence. It didn't really come to be because it essentially already existed. The strings, the neck, the soundboard, the bridge, the nut, blah, 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 blah. All those things existed. They are, right? They're part of what is. And the guitar is just those things. And so you don't really have coming into being. It already existed. And so if we go that first route, if we want to say that generated things come from what is, the argument goes that then generation never actually happens. There is no such thing as coming to be. The guitar doesn't genuinely come to be because, in a sense, it already existed. The strings, the neck, the soundboard, the bridge, the nut, the machine heads, and so on already existed. And so it wasn't generated. And so generation is impossible if we go that route. Okay. So we won't go that route. What about that second route then? From what is not? Because we want to say, okay, no, the guitar didn't exist. And then it did exist. And so it comes from what is not. Well, if you were to list the parts of what is not, you would list nothing. There's nothing. And so what we'd be saying if we went this route is that the guitar came to be, was generated from what is not, from nothing, right? Like that. Well, that doesn't work. That's impossible. It's impossible for something to come from nothing. If it's nothing, how could it possibly give rise to anything? It's nothing. There's nothing there. It's not like a guitar can just pop into existence out of absolutely nothing. Nothing can pop into existence out of nothing, right? It's impossible for something to come to be from nothing. And so that second route is not going to work either. Because if there was nothing, well, then nothing would come to be. There would be no generation again, right? You can't have generation from nothing. And so both ways of going are impossible, it seems. You don't really get generation or coming to be from either route. And so it looks like coming to be is impossible. Generation is impossible. This is a very counterintuitive claim. This is what some pre-Socratic philosophers had argued, that nothing actually comes to be. More generally, they argued, change is impossible. Nothing ever actually changes. And so when you see things change, that's just a kind of illusion. things don't actually change, because any kind of change is a coming to be, is a generation, right? Right? If you just change the position of your hand came to be in a different place. And we could run the same kind of puzzle, right? So the pre Socratic philosophers who argued this way, there were two of them that were most famous for doing this, Parmenides and Zeno. Um, and they knew that their position was very paradoxical and very counterintuitive. But nonetheless, they claimed that if you think it through, this is what you'll come to. Coming to be is impossible. Now, Aristotle is going to have none of this, but he recognizes the challenge. And it's by responding to this challenge, by showing what goes wrong with this argument, that Aristotle is going to isolate for us, draw out, and articulate the principles of nature.